Welcome to Preparing for AI, the AI podcast for everybody, with your hosts Jimmy Rhodes and me, Matt Cartwright. We explore the human and social impacts of AI, looking at the impact on jobs, AI and sustainability, and most importantly, the urgent need for safe development of AI, governance and alignment. We were in heaven, you and I, and when I lay with you and closed my eyes, our fingers touched the sky. I'm sorry, baby.
Sorry.
Welcome to Preparing for AI with me, Ali Baba.
And me, one of the 40 thieves.
So, you may have guessed, or you probably wouldn't have guessed, but the very observant among you may guess that. I haven't said what they might have guessed yet.
Well, I probably didn't have guessed it, so...
Has anyone guessed that this is another of our series of China-themed episodes?
Oh, I knew that.
Yeah.
But I don't think anyone would have guessed.
Would you have guessed it?
No.
Well,
this was one of our audience.
This is one of our China-themed episodes anyway. And Alibaba, as well as the person who accompanied the 40 thieves, is that what he did?
Yeah, it's got nothing to do with China, though.
No, but also Alibaba is a Chinese tech company. So do you see what I did?
Yeah, I think I was just trying to throw people off.
Yeah. So, well, this is a good start. Is anyone still listening to the episode? I'm not sure. If you are still listening to the episode, this is an absolutely cracking interview we did with Shao, who is a China writer, researcher, and consultant. She's worked with loads of different media organizations. She's written with loads of different media organizations. She's worked in various other jobs. She's like genuinely fascinating, but a cracking interview. Like we touched on a lot of stuff around energy and AI with a bit of a focus on China, but we talked about the US as well. We also talked about Chinese apps, the kind of Chinese ecosystem, where it's better than the US, where it's different. It was really good, wasn't it? It's a really good interview.
Yeah, it's a fascinating conversation. I think, although a lot of this it'll be unfamiliar territory for a lot of people who are like Western, a lot of our listeners who are from the West. But I found it super fascinating, and also some of the stuff around how actually they're some of the most used apps in the world, which I don't think a lot of people will be aware of. So, yeah, fascinating.
And one of the things she talked about, which she really knows a lot about as well, is this kind of China shedding, it's called, where there are these businesses, tech businesses basically that are Chinese or began in China but are now in
they're distancing themselves.
Yeah, most of them being in Singapore, and the way that they've kind of distanced themselves, and a lot of these apps that people don't know are Chinese that they're using, where they're based in Singapore, but it's kind of Chinese knowledge, Chinese money, Chinese expertise that has created them. So yeah, it was a cracking interview. So it's quite a long interview. So I think we'll just get straight onto it. Me and you will maybe go into the other room, take 5 minutes, take a time out, maybe have a quick nap, and then we'll go back and interview Shao.
Yeah. Before the interview that we did already, that you already mentioned.
Yeah, but keeping up pretenses, because I think most people watching listening.
What pretense? You just said we've just interviewed her.
But most people watching and listening to this interview wouldn't understand that temporally we could have done that. They will think we're literally about to go into another room, and then when we come back in, we'll do that interview. So they wouldn't understand that we could possibly have recorded the interview first.
I've given the game away there.
And done this second, and you've completely ruined that.
And I'm going to do the song before all this.
Have you done it yet?
No, I haven't done it.
No. We should probably add as well, the rest of the episode's better than this. So do stick with it.
And more coherent.
More coherent. So see you on the other side.
Okay, so this week we're joined by Shao, who is a writer, researcher, and consultant. Thank you for joining us on the podcast, Grace, and I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you so much for having me today, Matt and Jimmy. I'm Grace, the author of AI Pro-M on Substack. Really, it's just a nerdier way of saying preface. So what I try to do is tell stories about the global AI infrastructure build out. I write primers, explainers on big tech AI strategies, especially with a focus on Chinese big tech, given my background having worked in Chinese big tech, and how it's been affecting geopolitics and been affected by geopolitics. Now, the reason I started this newsletter, and we talked about this a bit before coming on this podcast, it was really threefold. First, I was just so fascinated by the development of AI technology. I actually quit my corporate job to pursue this full time. And not just really from a consumer perspective, like all these fancy apps, but also just how it's shaping our society, politics, and the economy in the future. Number two, I started off my career actually as a tech reporter, and I think it's really becoming an independent writer and researcher. It's really bringing me back to my roots, and I'm able to kind of work on the journalistic side of things as well as bringing my business acumen and kind of bring it all together. And like I mentioned, I worked at a lot of big tech firms and helping with their international PR strategies over the last couple of years, I've realized that a lot of the innovation is being overshadowed by geopolitics right now. And I do want to really kind of shine light on that. And the last bit, which is really related to the second thing, is given my connection with media and all my ties and friends in journalism, I'm seeing a lot of great talent and reporters leaving this area, being me in Hong Kong and you guys in China. And I think that the world needs to see and hear the stories out here. So I do try to dig those out or meet interested people and write about them and share with the world.
Fantastic, thank you. So I think that's super interesting. Like, I think our first talking point was kind of around global infrastructure challenges with AI, sustainability, and a little bit on developed and developing countries.
Yeah, so I think to start off with, we look at just the two biggest players, right? The China and the US. And there's kind of two parallel universe, and we've seen that with consumer technology companies as well, and now with AI. And there's a lot of hype around China not be able to access GPUs and advanced technology for hardware. But really, I wrote a op-ed for Fortune, I think about 4 months ago, or even 4 or 5 months ago, and I was saying that look, it's actually that's part of it. That's part of the arms race, if you must put it. But really, the other part of the equation here is the ability to rally up energy and power and a lot of infrastructure demand needed for AI development, which is like, we all know for training, for inference, we need to have massive compute power. So what I really kind of wrote about in that article is that, the bottleneck right now, especially for the US, is in energy. And as we know in a lot of headlines, the US is actually experiencing a power shortage. And there's a long lead time for a lot of the things needed, such as like transmitters. And, we understand in the US, there's also like land permits that might take a long time for a lot of companies to kind of, acquire new power plants. That takes a long time. But now, like on the other side of the world, China, for better or worse, the command economy actually gives it a huge upper hand. And what it means that is like, and we saw this with renewable energy 10 years ago, right? And we saw this with like even cloud computing data centers a couple years ago. What China's economy can do and Chinese government can do is actually rally up private and public sector resources really quickly, so they can build up data centers really quickly in the west of the country, and then collect data from the east where it's more urbanized. So actually in China, there's even a policy called East Data, West Compute. So really, a lot of unurbanized areas in the West, like such as Inner Mongolia, Gansu, Guizhou, these are places that frankly aren't even really good land for agriculture anyway, and they're just sitting idly there. And then you have like literally more than 1 billion people sitting on the coastal cities of Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, near me and Hong Kong. And all of these consumers are constantly connected to the internet, and there's so much data to be analyzed, and they're able to kind of delegate that resource really quickly, and also bring in not just capital and, like I said, land, but also call on energy from private sectors. Like I said, a huge advantage in their existing renewable energy capacity right now, and also just frankly like cheaper labor and cheaper talent to really rally that up really quickly. So that really garnered a lot of interest, that article. And I think I've just been really building up on that and really diving deep into the infrastructure landscape for AI, and then a lot of how big tech in China are optimizing the advantages they have here.
So, something I read in one of your Substacks talking about energy was about this making Guizhou So Guizhou province, for those that don't know, is a province right in the south of China. It used to be the poorest province, I think. It's now moved up. I think it's about the fourth poorest now, but it's still generally a pretty poor province with a pretty nice kind of fairly rich capital city, but a lot of kind of impoverished countryside. And that appears to be, is it like a pilot zone for data centers? Is that right?
Yeah. So Guizhou was actually it started off as a cloud computing center. So Alibaba invested heavily in Guizhou for that. For this was like, I don't know, a couple years ago, 5, 6 years ago. But going beyond Guizhou, we're seeing like Henan, Inner Mongolia, like I said,
Yeah, in
Gansu,
Mongolia.
along those areas, like you mentioned, that mostly like rural areas, mountainous areas, or just like prairies and deserts that are underutilized. Those are land that the government is saying, look, to private companies, come and build your data centers here. We will find a way to help you build up the infrastructure needed, whether it's roads or local government approvals. We will help you sort that out. And then on top of that is those regions I just mentioned, their energy cost is extremely low, actually. In fact, I read somewhere it's like lower than the cost of like industrial power than even say like India or like Mexico. So it's really in these companies' advantage, say like Alibaba or ByteDance or whoever, to try to find partners to help it build up data center capacity out there.
I'd just like to go back a little bit because I think some of our listeners will be unfamiliar with all of this. I mean, in the US, for example, because we talked about the US right at the start. So I've heard, I actually knew that there was problems around like the numbers of chips and numbers of GPUs and data centers they had in one place because it was overloading the power grid. Is it more that that's the case, or is it literally that there isn't enough power production, or is it both?
Frankly, I don't know too much about the chips overloading bit, but I think what I've been researching is just frankly there's not enough energy right now. I think in a lot of Western countries, Canada, where I'm from, also is facing this, which is like you have a huge mandate on green energy to be part of the grid. So under a Biden administration right now, there's a lot of requirement. So that said, gas and coal and these traditional energy sources have not really been optimized per se for economic use, but obviously it's better for the environment. So I think, when we see a Trump administration come in, this might shift a little bit right now. And then another thing, as I mentioned earlier, kind of passing is just like in general for like anything in the US to build up really quickly, it takes a lot longer because like say, the great thing is there's like a check and balance and law and order. But the thing that means also is like there's no shortcuts. You could be Meta, you could be Google, you could be Alphabet, whoever. Sorry, Google's Alphabet, but you can be Meta or Alphabet. But you still can't just like jump hoops really quickly. You still have to go through all the paper filings to get your permits, to get your energy quota, to get recruitment, labor, and your safety checkups and all that stuff done. And that's how it takes a long time. Whereas in China, like, if it's a national effort, then it just gets done. Like, roads get built in like 3 days, buildings get built in like 3 months. Like things just move a lot faster in China.
I had an anecdote and a question. My anecdote was, and this is probably a good example of how, when China doesn't want it to happen, they'll stop it. And in the example you're giving, they will get everything behind it. I think about 5 or 6 years ago, I remember that sort of Bitcoin miners had focused in on kind of rural Sichuan. The Sichuan has quite a lot of hydropower. And they'd focus in on rural Sichuan because, there's this abundance of energy that's really cheap. And then they all got kicked out. And I think they pretty much got kicked out of China. But, as an example of they found these kind of power sources. But obviously, cryptocurrency is not something that China is obviously, supporting, whereas obviously the development of AI is very different. That was just an anecdote. But my question was, these provinces, I mean, I think it's probably actually pretty transparent to me knowing the provinces, but I think for our listeners it wouldn't be, that the choice of these provinces is this political? So is this, the choice of using those provinces rather than somewhere on the East Coast or rather than somewhere in Guangdong that's near Hong Kong and Guangzhou and places like that, or someone that's near Beijing? Is that a political decision because it's a way of improving the lives and improving the economy of what would otherwise be rural areas? And if so, why don't they
Um,
put them in Dongbei? Because they need it in the Rust Belt, right? But they
they
don't seem to be
are. They
building.
are.
Oh, they are. Okay.
No,
Well,
no,
there we
no,
go.
they are. They're all over the country. They're also in Guangdong. I think they are. They are. I think it's just like the story is sexier for the West because of what you mentioned, because it's not just, oh, another industry, Like, you have vast agriculture in Dongbei, you have all kinds of innovation and trade and manufacturing in Guangdong, you have technology. But the thing is, in these Western regions, they frankly don't have that much going on for them in terms of economic like returns, things to generate economic returns. So I think a lot of attention is put there, but also like I said, it's just cheaper land, cheaper energy, and it's not like. So this brings me to actually the second point of like, why it could be actually beyond environmental reasons. Why if something people think it's not a good idea to build up data centers, it actually doesn't bring in that many jobs. The reason is like actually data centers can just be self-run. So you don't really want to build them in Guangdong and take out other people's like resources essentially. Like why eat into the grid that, people in Guangdong need to use for, KTV. But like, if you put it out there in the West, it's unused land, unused energy supply. And like you mentioned, there's a ton of renewable that can be part of the grid, which is better for the environment as well and cheaper to generate, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, and on the renewable point, I mean, you mentioned a little bit about China and how they've got ahead with renewable. Would you want to elaborate on that a little bit? Because again, I think a lot of our listeners will be kind of fairly unfamiliar with China and this kind of topics.
Yeah, I think, look, I'm not a renewable energy expert or anything. What I can say is China was really, really lagging in renewable. It didn't really exist in terms of like this industry essentially 10 years ago. And we all saw in '08 when the Olympics happened in Beijing, like Beijing got blue skies again. And a bit of personal touch is, I had severe allergies when I lived in China from 10 years old to 14 years old. And I'm not going to age myself there, but give you a rough age. And it was because it was burning coal like crazy, and no one understood the pollution consequence, and no one actually the average civilian didn't even understand that was caused by the pollution, caused by coal burning, because in the up north it's all very very cold, and essentially, one is I think for international competition, Paris Climate Agreement, all these like big political reasons, but also for the safety and health of their own people. The Chinese government decided to clean up and actually cut coal and boost renewables. And in the last 10 years, it's now actually one of the biggest renewable generators in the world. And like I said, there's vast land. There's on the west, so we have a lot of solar. Some of the biggest solar companies are all Chinese, like Longji, off the top of my head, like Trina or something. There's quite a few of them. They're probably listed. They're huge, right? And then you have, and they're actually also the whole supply chain of like solar panel manufacturers are all coming from China as well, by the way. And that was another huge contentious topic for the Biden administration, I think, trying to like basically ban a lot of the imports into the US, right? So that's a whole different topic. But my point is, I guess, like China has that huge advantage. And my point about renewables is that China is able to rally private and public sectors really quickly. 10 years, that's it. I don't have allergies when I go to Beijing for work trips anymore. The air is cleaner. It's just much more pleasant. And I think it's really, really been great. I'm not saying the country doesn't use coal anymore. I just think they've added a lot of renewable to the mix. So on the topic of renewables, I do want to touch on, which is like why a lot of people even ask me when I'm writing about these topics. They're like, oh, why can't we just use renewables to, power data centers? Because, like, wouldn't that make sense? We need power. Everyone's freaking out. But like, everyone's saying, let's use renewables. But it's not like that easy. And I think a lot of big tech are actually getting a lot of hate. And it's not unfair. It's just hard on them, because the reality is a lot of them, what they're doing, like say the Amazons and the Facebooks, whatnot, they're purchasing like green energy basically quota from like the grid. The issue with renewables right now is that, it's just not really reliable yet. Not saying the technology is not reliable. It's just that renewable energy has its own nature. So it has limited dispatchability, which means like solar and wind energy are inherently intermittent, right? So, during the day we got some sun, at night we don't. You can have some wind, then some days you don't. And that means that actually the amount of energy generated would not be consistent. But with AI data centers, you can't have like glitches. You can't just be like, oh, it's generating like power. We got a data center running. All of a sudden, it just stops. So, we have that's one issue. Then it's an inconsistency, right? Like I kind of already alluded to that. But basically, because it's intermittent, it cannot be guaranteed. So it's not only just the timing of it cannot be guaranteed, but the amount of it cannot be guaranteed. So in the summer, we'll have a lot more power from solar. In fact, a lot of being wasted. And then during peak hours, but then like during the winter, you will have maybe less hours of sunlight, right? And then another issue that's sometimes a bit overlooked is just the fact that we don't really have adequate storage solutions right now. So, in China, we all know about these lithium battery powered EVs. They're so suave, they're super sleek, they're very easy to charge. Those batteries are great for EVs and they're great for our smartphones because they're light, they're very fast to charge, albeit despite some, safety concerns here and there. But in general, they're not really good with storing power, a lot of power for a really long amount of time. And it goes back to my point about like how, if you only can store a little bit of power, what if it runs out in the middle of the night and you still don't have solar to run it immediately? So I think there's a lot of innovation going on right now, and it's innovation driven by AI, and AI a lot of experts are using AI to try to find solutions to power AI. So hopefully this is going to be a vicious cycle because it would be great for us to have more reliable renewable energy, not just for this AI data center infrastructure piece, but just in general. But right now, what happens is usually just like the renewables being generated just goes to the local grid. And then whatever is needed to power the data centers would just be purchased by, say, the big tech or whoever, or the data center operators, managers, and then the hyperscalers, and they would just use that. So I think it's a little bit unfair to say that these big tech are greenwashing their energy consumption, but the reality is it's not like they are literally using just renewable to power the data centers or whatever use they need. It's like they are just using whatever amount of power they need, but they will purchase renewable energy from the grid to, offset their carbon footprint in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I've even heard sort of mention of nuclear power again in terms of, I mean, obviously that's
fission power.
Yeah, fission, yeah.
Or the little not micro, they're like mini, Rolls-Royce are developing, aren't they? The kind of mini reactors, which
really small reactors,
potentially you could just buy modular reactors, and you basically have one next to your data center that powers it.
But I think, I mean, I don't know what you think about that, but I've heard mention of nuclear power, and I think part of that's to do with like these data centers are quite remote, and nuclear power has obviously got a really bad rap. But also there's these like new sort of modular reactors and new potential technologies coming online.
Yeah, so there are these like SMRs, like small modular reactors, like you're mentioning, that like are popping up in the US, and I think China's looking into it as well. But the reality, is, like you said, it doesn't have a really good rep, and for a few good reasons. Like the most recent tragedy we saw was in Fukushima, and even recently, sitting in Asia, like people were freaking out about the seafood from the water that they released Fukushima nuclear reactant material into the ocean. Right? They're like freaking out. I think people were hoarding sea salt or something in Hong Kong at one point. It's quite funny. Because they're like, we can't buy salt anymore.
When nobody was eating, no one in Beijing was eating any Japanese seafood. And if you went into a restaurant that sold sushi and asked them where it's from, and they would always say, Norway. And and you'd kind of watch to see if they could keep a straight face when they said it. I think that's kind of died off. I think like most stories, it's kind of faded a little bit. But there was a point when all the Japanese seafood, and actually probably all the seafood that just comes from Bohai or somewhere in the north of China, had miraculously overnight just become Norwegian.
That's really funny. Yeah, so I think there's that, and like it is a very, very serious concern. And I think I think even recently I was listening to the All In podcast, and Chamath and them are having this like whole argument as well. They're like, would you be okay if, say you're living in Minnesota and down the street you had like a nuclear reactor, and then they're like, well, how far is it? But like, how far is it? Is it safe? We don't know, right? Like, say like you say, oh, it's totally fine if it's like 100 miles away from me, but what if it's close to a school? Are you morally okay with it, right? Like if it does explode. So obviously there's still a lot of concerns, but I do think right now a lot of people are saying hydro nuclear would be the most reliable renewable energy source if we do pursue renewable energy as a more stable energy source. But hydro's the issue with hydro is that we can't control where's a dam, where's a lake, there's not that much like water you can play around with. So obviously like solar and wind gets all the attention just because it's easier to just plot them around, but they have their issues. So right now we don't really have a full renewable solution yet, but hopefully there's more innovation to come in this area.
Yeah, you never know. Maybe once AI gets smart enough, it'll help us solve nuclear fusion, and then we can just power everything with that.
And then it will use
It's really scary.
to destroy us all.
Yeah, no, seriously.
Power itself and destroy everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's gonna be so smart that we won't even need a brain anymore. And then I don't know. We'll talk about that later.
Well, people can go back and listen to the COVID episode where I declared that we need AI because people won't have brains left. So there's a little tidbit for people that want to go back and listen to one of our earlier episodes.
Hot takes.
Is that like a side effect of COVID?
I don't want to spoil it. You'll have to listen to the episode if you want to know. My hypothesis is pretty far out.
So we want to talk a little bit about the dynamic between sort of developing and developed versus developed countries, and why what they're doing with data centers.
Yeah, I think it's like quite interesting. So I just recently wrote a couple pieces on like Canada, Malaysia, and Thailand, just all building up data centers, and I think the concerns are very different. And just putting on my like social justice warrior hat for like a hot second here is like it's really interesting to see like countries like say Malaysia, right? Johor is right now really really hot amongst a lot of like data center investment like circles. They're all talking about it, and the reason is like getting massive build outs. The basically Singapore banned data centers, and Johor is this like region right above Singapore, and they're creating this like free trade zone agreement with Singapore. They're gonna like apparently launch like a no passport requirement like travel plan, and it's basically there, like the infrastructure is there to support all the AI companies and the big tech in Singapore. And as we know, like most major US and Chinese big tech headquarters in Asia are all in Singapore. And that's like because Singapore has become this like neutral, safe haven for like finance and technology in the last couple of years, given the geopolitical tensions. So we got like ByteDance, we got like Facebook, we got Google, Netflix, like Tencent, like all Tencent games are all there. And it's said that actually ByteDance is probably one of the biggest clients of the data centers out in Johor right now. And it's interesting. So it's getting a lot of investment, a lot of USD injection, or at least like FDI, and it's garnering a lot of like attraction from internal like policymakers. Like all the government people are all like jumping on this opportunity, sign deals and everything. But the issue is Johor actually historically had an issue with like water shortage and power shortage. So all of this like sudden demand is going to take away from the grid and the clean water so the water is used for cooling, right? So it's going to take away from the residents that live there. And this is kind of like an interesting angle, I guess I picked up when I was writing about this. Is like Thailand's doing the same. But in countries like Canada or in Australia, like governments are basically saying no to data centers. They're like, okay, thank you hyperscalers for being interested in us. We also have a lot of land. We also have a lot of energy. We also have, we actually have even better infrastructure. Canada even has a lot of tech talent and great data security rules and laws and even cold weather that will be easier for cooling. But there are a lot of policy makers, especially like say provinces like British Columbia, where it's a bit more left leaning compared to say Alberta, which is a lot more right leaning. They're just saying no to this because they're like, this is going to put on more stress for our residents than it's actually going to benefit us. So it's a tricky thing. And I've been talking to people in Canada about this, and they're saying, hey, look, if we can bring in data centers in like Canada, across Canada, Alberta and such, and Ontario, potentially, if we have infrastructure, maybe because we have all the things I mentioned, all the other advantages, maybe we can actually build up like a whole ecosystem for AI in Canada. We can position ourselves better because then a lot of the tech developers and tech talents could potentially now pivot into AI. And if we already have AI infrastructure, hyperscalers will be building up infrastructure there. It'll be very natural for them to also build up a corporate head office. There's also, very strong data security laws. There's strong, there's strong talent pools that speak English. So it's also easy for collaboration with the US, or even just like, there's even existing pipelines to the US for energy supply. So there's a lot of like advantages for Canada to kind of position themselves as AI powerhouse. But right now, given what I just mentioned, a lot of policymakers are saying, I'm not sure I need to watch this, and I don't want to burden our own citizens.
So I wanted to ask you, which I guess is kind of maybe an end to this kind of section of the podcast interview. But it always comes down to US China, right? That's what all of the current, the current conversation is around US China. And we sort of talked about the energy things. And I think we haven't sort of gone into that much detail actually on why some of the challenges for the US in particular. But let's just accept that, the US is going to have an issue with energy. It's already experienced an issue with energy, and China is not. So where do you see that kind of taking the race? Because obviously the chip restrictions and supply chain restrictions that are put in place, we're seeing innovation in China that potentially could lead to a breakthrough. But even if it doesn't, it feels like the chips are maybe not as far off as we thought. So where do you see it? Do you see like 2 or 3 years? And I'm asking you to kind of speculate here rather than to sort of put a bet on. But do you see this is really something that's going to allow China to catch up or maybe even move ahead? Or do you think no, it will be behind, but it will allow it to keep pace?
Yeah, so I think I think I'm like actually just starting to work on this piece looking at Huawei's chips. And I think, when it comes to the chip technology, honestly, just like nothing from China can currently compete with like NVIDIA's chips in terms of performance. So that's that, right? Like, and I think Joe Tsai said in a conference recently, it was like JP Morgan's China conference, something, it was a couple months ago. He was like, look, it's just still like at least 2 years. Actually, no, sorry. I think Joe Tsai said on a podcast recently with the Norwegian hedge fund manager, Norris, check his name, but he was saying, look, China is at least like 2 years behind than the US when it comes to like advanced chip technology. I think I'm not an expert at this. I can't comment more. But what I think is interesting is when I'm writing about this is, like you said, hypothetically, if China can make the breakthrough on chip technology, then it has a huge advantage on energy. But yes, I agree. So without that major breakthrough, we don't know. Now, then it leads me to the second part of this, which is like what everyone's now starting to realize is, are we fixating on the right thing? Are we putting too much energy and attention on just comparing like the models being trained, using these big tech, these advanced chips, or should we actually start thinking of the winner could be actually on the application end, right? And that kind of brings me to my point on China's AI like application end and their innovation or at least advantage. So, we saw with ByteDance TikTok, right? It's taken over the world. I think we see in China with all these super apps, whether it's WeChat or Alipay, it has so much more to offer and so many more touch points. That means more consumer data and more learning opportunities, more AI integration. And I think even recently, Baidu's Robin Li said at Baidu's 2024 like own event was like, look, the winner in AI right now is going to be an application, and people need to focus on how to create an actual usable application. It's not just our little chatbot, Chappy. I mean, I'm obsessed with Perplexity. It helps me with all my research. But if you think about it, perplexity actually is basically helping me prompt ChatGPT better, right? But if, say, the models are going to be so good in the future, then do we still need a perplexity to help me prompt it so well? Or can, I don't know. I actually don't know. So the question is kind of open ended. So, or if like an application, it's already created so advanced or sophisticated, then do I still need to be a really strong prompter for these like models? So I don't know. I guess my comment is more like, I think innovation might come from China as well when it comes to consumer facing application, just given how Chinese consumers are also so AI savvy and like mobile savvy, internet savvy. I think I was a TCM doctor that day just because my back pain, and then the little girl was literally like, I use like AI for like patients now, and it's so crazy how these random people, everyone across all industries, all using AI, adopting it.
Well, I'll just plug our episode, my interview with Dr. Xie from a few weeks ago, where because he combines Western and Chinese medicine and uses AI already. So if you're interested in doctors that use AI, then there's a plug for an earlier episode of the podcast.
Well, and actually, like literally the last episode, we were talking about how we think exactly the same thing. So it feels like we're starting to actually see some of those applications now, and we're starting to see sort of fully finished, completed products or polished products, so to speak, rather than kind of early beta, alpha releases of things. So one of the ones we mentioned was 11 Labs, who now have like conversational AI, and you can clone anyone's voice, that kind of thing. And I think it's that kind of like commercial applications for AI, which is going to be the next big wave, probably. With kind of large language models and some of the AI technologies we have now as a bit of a platform. But I think what you've been talking about there is kind of quite a nice segue into our second part, which is about AI in China and Southeast Asia. So I just wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit more about China's AI ecosystem and how that's developing.
Yeah, I mean, China has its complete parallel universe when it comes to AI, and it's largely due to two reasons. One is just not getting their hands on the technology needed because of US restrictions. And so they have to like innovate and create their own chips, right? And you have Huawei doing that, you have like Alibaba doing it, you have everyone doing it. And then you have also these amazing startups who are, developing their own LLMs. You got Baichuan, you got Minimax, you got off the top of my head, there's like the Zhipu, you got, so that's like the top four tigers, and they're all on the Fortune's top 50 like most innovative AI firms right now list, right? So there's all of that innovation on the kind of infrastructure layer, and then like I mentioned, there's a lot of innovation application layers. So a lot of companies like ByteDance and Alibaba are actually pushing out a lot of consumer friendly AI applications to the Western market as well as the Chinese market. So anything from like, editing your photos to your voice, to your videos, to, ChatGPT like chatbot kind of functions. And then you have enterprise kind of innovation where like Alibaba and Huawei is really, really focused on, given that they have their cloud infrastructure and they're really benefiting from this. So what they can do is actually, for the enterprise clients, sell their cloud service, and on top of that, add on their large language model service, and then basically kind of provide that, like in China, like 一条龙服务, right? Like the whole a service across the entire stack. So I think there's a lot of innovation there. And then in terms of Southeast Asia, I guess, what I mentioned earlier, like ByteDance is kind of like known to be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, investors in the Johor area for data centers, and they're doing it through companies such as like China Data Group, and they have a subsidiary called Bridge Data Centers. So they basically are running and setting up all these data centers in Johor, and their biggest client is ByteDance. So like I guess Southeast Asia is for that use, and then the second use is a lot of consumer-facing apps, due to the sensitivities in the US, are actually being launched across, like, say, in huge markets like Indonesia and Thailand and the Philippines. And the third bit, which we touched on earlier, was just that Singapore itself, the kind of hub, the financial and tech hub of Southeast Asia, is now being seen as the neutral position to set up like a lot of enterprises. So what a lot of Chinese companies, from big to small, from private equity to tech, from financial firms to hardware firms, what they're doing is they're trying to use what is called the China shedding strategy. And my friend Ivy Yang actually writes about this a lot on her Substack. So shout out. But it really essentially is like a PR strategy. It's saying, hey, we're not Chinese, and you just completely like pretend you're not, and you like register a company in Singapore and say you're Singapore company, Singapore headquarters, Singapore fundraise, blah, blah, blah. Or you say, we're an international company, keep it big, and then you register a company in Singapore, but you still plug in your management from China. Or the third way is actually they just register a company there, they rebrand themselves, and they pretend they're not related to their parent company, but they still are. So this China shedding strategy is being adopted by startups as well as big tech. And it's really just to kind of help them not gain unnecessary attention, I guess, what a lot of people are saying. And also when they're fundraising, say startups, when they're fundraising in the US, some firms are just like, I won't invest in you if you're a Chinese firm. So even though some firms are literally like, they have a whole R&D team in Beijing or Shanghai, Shenzhen, their founders are PRC passport holders. They might have been educated in the West. They just register company in Singapore and they call themselves like homegrown Singaporean. So there's that as well. Yeah.
Is Shine a good example of this? Obviously not an AI company, but I think I'm trying to think of examples that people listening to this who are not familiar with the kind of ecosystem might be familiar with.
Shein.
Is Shine a reasonable example? Shein.
It's Shein. You're not shopping for fast fashion.
Shine, so it shows how much I'm into fast fashion.
You're not a 14-year-old girl. That's the thing.
Well, I don't think I am.
Just by the way, breaking news. No, Shein, I think they try to do that, but they were a bit too late. I think they were already like quite well known to be Chinese, but you could see how companies like Shein and like all these companies are actually like, sorry, my AirPod keeps on falling out, but they're finding ways to basically shy away from the Chinese heritage. And you could see that they were going to go public in the US. Originally, that was a plan. And, they went around talking about it for a while. And then all of a sudden they wanted to switch over to London. And I think there was twofold. The concern was, one is China's own concern, and the other side was actually the US regulatory concerns. But I wouldn't say it's complete like a PR strategy for them, because I think they were a bit too late on trying to not be Chinese. I think a lot of smaller startups are actually taking that route. Or you can think of TikTok, or like even the notorious one is Hill House repositioning themselves, saying they're not a Chinese private equity firm. They're a Asia firm. They're Asia private equity firm. So, you get these companies blatantly kind of erasing their background on their Wikipedia, or going on mainstream media and like, getting their basically like introductions or bios changed. So there is definitely that effort being done by a lot of Chinese companies going global right now.
I'm really interested in it. Was in your, I'm trying to think, I'm just thinking the date of your Substack articles. I'm gonna link this in the show notes, but made in China AI apps that you are using. So it was from the 14th of November. So this app is, I'm really enjoying. I mean, I talk about it quite a lot on the podcast actually, but about trying to compare Chinese apps to the kind of Western US version. So this is something that, I mean, this is the article. I should have stopped talking about it, and I wish you'd written that article 2 months ago, because I could have just linked it. But I mean, it's really good, because I think trying to give people a kind of comparison. One thing I'm particularly interested in, because your sort of chat GPT comparison. So where you've given, I think Kimi, and there was one other one that was
like
your
Doubao, Baidan Doubao.
Yeah, I mean, so
Doubao
was the other one. Yeah, it was Doubao was the other one. I mean, I use I use a Chinese large language model quite often on a sort of daily basis, just for doing really basic tasks like asking questions, translating, things like that, just because it means I don't have to put a VPN on and off. That's basically the main reason. And there are some cool uses. Like there are some things like on Tongyi, it has a really good sort of database for putting in documents and analyzing them in quite a cool way. But I generally use them in English. Like I use them sometimes for Chinese, but it's mainly to translate stuff from Chinese into English because I'm lazy. But the thing that I found with it is in English, they're just not as good. And obviously you're using them more in Chinese. I mean, do you think they are comparable? Obviously the models in the background are. We know that like QN is, I think in a lot of ways is outperforming Llama models in terms of open source, and that it's on some of the leaderboards out there at the front. But in terms of the consumer interface that we've got, I think I might have given this example before, but I asked the question about my daughter had a tooth come in at the back behind her other teeth. And I was like, is that a wisdom tooth? Because none of her teeth have fallen out yet. And I asked Tongyi, and it said, oh yeah, you need to, this is not usual. You need to go and see a dentist immediately. This is really weird. And it's called a hypermolar or something like that. Then I asked Claude and it said, oh, this is just the first of her full set of teeth coming through. This is completely normal. So that's a kind of weird example. But like, even though that was in English, to me, it's like, okay, I just don't trust I don't trust that particular model now for anything where I need like a good answer. Obviously that's just one model, but that is Alibaba's model. And that is, as far as I know, powered by a QN, it should be a decent one. Like, do you find them to be on a par? And I'm talking here in terms of not the model itself in the background, but in terms of, like I say, the kind of consumer interface that you would use.
I think it's really hard to compare. Honestly, to be frank, I use the English side a lot more just because I use a lot of these AI tools for my research. I find it just so much more efficient. It helps me like find a lot of sources. I can then go dig into the sources of me just like Googling and reading through like a zillion articles. I think hallucination happens on both ends. I think the China ones are much better for researching Chinese material. So when I say you need to find certain Chinese government material and I ask Perplexity or ChatGPT, it doesn't really take me to the sources I need. Or sometimes I ask them, can you give me this or that? In China, they actually just link you to S&P. They think S&P is the most Chinese thing they can like, the source they can find, right? But whereas like I need, it's like literally like it's
so
like
we should just say, Bill, that's the South China Morning Post, which is a Hong Kong based newspaper or online for most people.
Yeah, it's a newspaper that does great actually China coverage, and it is disclosure owned by Alibaba, but said to have editorial independence, kind of like Washington Post and Amazon. Sorry, my little rant. But yeah, I think, I don't know. I couldn't answer. I don't know about this molar issue, but I have had issues where I asked like even ChatGPT really, really simple things. I'm like, oh yeah, the Fortune thing was really, really straightforward. So Fortune came out with their top 50 AI innovators, right? And I asked Perplexity, I said, hey, can you tell me out of the 50 companies, which ones are Chinese? And they literally listed out like ByteDance, Baidu, and Alibaba, like the really, really obvious ones. And I was like, no, I know there are more. So I went on and kept on prompting. And it just couldn't give me the right answer. And I think it's just not able to actually scrape a lot of information on companies that maybe don't have a lot of PR material or even coverage in English yet. It's like the ones I mentioned, like Baichuan or Minimax or Moonshot. These are like more startup-y companies in China. That said, these companies might also be adapting the so-called China shedding strategy. So they might be trying to avoid being referred to Chinese company. But, when I ask them about US-centric things, they can always get it correct. Not always, but you know what I mean? Like it's just like the hallucination or the incorrectness just rate drops down a lot. So I think the languages are still very separated. I would use the different tools and different languages for different issues, I would say. One thing I think I do want to touch on, which I mentioned in the article you brought up, is the user interface and just user experience is often very different. And this kind of has a, heritage reason from like consumer internet mobile apps era. And you look at like Taobao versus Amazon. It's like Amazon is so clean, so it's like a white background with just like what you need to purchase and the purchase button. And Taobao has like 500 things coming out at you and like all these apps. And next, like I'm looking at a dress next thing I know I'm buying.
So true. This is so
hair
true.
dryer, and the thing is like Chinese consumers like it better. Like it's a user experience kind of thing. Same as like if you watch like streaming service, like Tencent Video, where I'm just like constantly overwhelmed. I don't know what's happening. There's just words popping up and bubbles and avatars. And then I'm just like, I'm a Netflix
The
person.
bullets that fly across the top of the screen that are just comment after comment, and people are like, no, don't turn those off. And you're like, but how can you watch that? Yeah, I mean, I feel like what I am, which is a white guy in his 40s here. When I'm kind of all these, but it is absolutely true. And not saying that either one is right or wrong. It's what you're used to. But I'm just thinking, as you're going through that comparison, I was thinking exactly of the interface. And if you click in the kind of top corner, and you'll get all these options, which include, the kind of cartoony image of, here's a kind of avatar based bit. Here's a thing where you can practice your English. Here's a thing where you can, produce absolutely terrible quality music, but it's all integrated. Whereas, I use Claude, and Claude's interfaces, you can click on your old chat, you can click on your profile, which is literally your name and what account you've got, and you can choose which of the models you want to use. And now there's one that says you can have a sort of simple answer or complicated answer. There are no other options, right? And that kind of clean interface of it for me is like, oh, it's so easy. When I look at the Chinese ones, I feel like, oh, there's too many things here and too much choice. But you're right. I think for a lot of Chinese people, you would look at Claude or even ChatGPT and be like, is that it? That's it? What? But I go on like Tiangong is the one that I quite like for just, it's really good that it can generate images, music, it's got this kind of multimodality. It seems to be actually quite good. Like I find that it gives better answers than most of the Chinese apps, and it's run by a company I hadn't heard of based in Beijing. I can't remember the name, but I quite like that one. But even with that, it is, multiple options, and you go in there and you've got to scroll down through loads and loads of images and stuff. And you're right, it's just a very different approach to it. And you can see if you're used to China and you're used to kind of the West, you can see the differences, and I can completely understand how they work for each of those markets. So I don't think Alibaba are aiming their model at me. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean. I think I'm all for clean, simple interfaces. Been a little bit.
You're also a man of a certain age.
Well, I know, but
I do too. You guys said I fit in right in.
You're a lot younger than
the
us.
Topics
Grace.
I like. But last time you said I was supposed to be the diversity guest, but I ended up talking about energy, liking clean user interface, just a typical average older white man.
I should say you did say before we even recorded, you described yourself. You did describe yourself thus when we first kind of discussed this episode, didn't you? And now you've said that I'm a 14-year-old Asian girl, so
yeah.
So
maybe I'm
the diversity.
I'm the diversity high,
yeah. But I think on that note, what if you ever want to use a Chinese or Asian app, it doesn't matter if it's AI app or consumer app, always use Asian developed what are they called, picture filtering and picture editing apps, because they are just superior.
Yes.
They are just so much superior. Meitu Xiu always like wows me. Like I put my photo up and I'm like, wow, like you can add makeup on, you can get rid of like your wrinkles, your fine lines, your dark circles, everything looks so natural. You can even change your lip colors, you can add eyelashes, everything. So Meitu actually has an AI.
I was going to say we should probably add that me and Jimmy are using it now, and this is with filters turned up to 11. This is what we look like. So you can only imagine what we really look like.
It's really good. I just tried it last week, and I was in Shanghai. I got these new headshots taken, and I used the AI auto button. I was so amazed. It was so natural. It just looked like a nice like Photoshop like studio picture, although I literally just took it on the streets with an iPhone. But so I would recommend that one if you need anything. And I think there's another one I like. Sorry, you just go.
No, I'm just looking down again at the article that I'm referencing, and it's got the top 100 app downloads. Is that app downloads in China, or is that app downloads across the world?
It says 全球, so it should be the world. But this is based on this company.
It does say 全球. Sorry, I didn't see that. So
So
number one is ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Number two is it Jianying?
Jianying is actually really great for editing, for video editing.
Now is it called video crop in English? There is an English name for it.
I couldn't tell you. Let me check.
Yeah, it's called video crop in English. So I can tell you because I've
Okay.
got the English version on my phone and I've got the Chinese version on my computer. But that's number 2 most downloaded. And I mean, like you say, like that is superior to anything. I mean, it integrates incredibly well with like Douyin, which is China's TikTok, and actually with TikTok. But yeah, I would agree with you. If you want to use any kind of image editing or video editing apps, and you can get a Chinese one that is in English, yeah, they are far superior. Like just the functionality is just like 10x, isn't it? It's amazing. And like Meitu and stuff like that, like I'm obviously pretty familiar with them, but I mean they are superior to anything I've seen from sort of Western apps.
I
I
have a
digress.
funny story I just remembered. It's about May 2, I think, ages ago when I was still at CNBC. It was one of my first stories with them. I was writing about May 2 Xiu, and then I had to get a like quote from the PR, and they weren't getting back to me. And I had this like huge freak out at my then boyfriend. I was like, oh my God, what if they hate me and then release all my unfiltered photos online? And then the world will see my double chin and all my massive pores. But that never happened. So Matrix has been around for a while, and they're great. And hopefully, they will never hear this
I
episode, and they won't
I find
release.
this I find this list, like this top 100, I find this list so interesting. I'm sort of half interviewing you. I can't stop looking at the list. We'll definitely share this article, and I highly recommend people have a look just because it's kind of fascinating. Yeah, I mean, the number of Chinese apps that are on there, Meitu is actually number 8, isn't it? So the 8th most downloaded app, which, okay, I
Yeah.
guess, China's a big country, but so's India. It's not, it's not just solely based on the fact that China has a large population. It's based on the fact that they are, like genuinely like top quality.
Actually leading the way, yeah. And you
It's
can
good,
download
and because
the apps you're looking at. You can download these on
You can download most of them
the Western versions, basically.
yeah, you can download most of them in like Apple or Google stores. Not all of them. And obviously, like I said, I think it's Video Crop is the one, and Meitu would be Meitu. You don't have to use Chinese characters. You can definitely download it with letters. Yeah.
yeah.
Available
So the
apps
top
near you.
Available
five
on App
are
Store near
ChatGPT,
you.
Jianying, Canva, Doubao, which is
Canva, yeah,
ByteDance,
Doubao, Duolingo,
and then
yeah.
Duolingo.
So 3
Yeah,
Chinese in the top 5.
Where's Claude?
yeah. Oh,
Come
it's not there. Yeah,
It's somewhere. Perplexity's number 50. I remember that.
Okay.
48
yeah.
actually.
I Notion
We should
54.
probably
These are
stop.
big
We should
names.
probably stop talking about the list because
The
people can
list,
read the
yeah.
list.
Become top of the pot.
But it's a great. I wanted to ask you a little bit because we talked a little bit about QN. So QN is Alibaba's kind of frontier open source model, and we've mentioned it on previous episodes on the show. But could you maybe just say a little bit about it in terms of the fact that it is, like I said, by some measure is the sort of top open source model out there. So that's quite a big thing to have a Chinese model that is potentially that good.
Yeah, it's said to be the most competitive Chinese LLM out there right now in comparison to like GPT-4 in terms of overall performances. I think it's when it was launched, it has like it's kind of like a chat bot like interface, and it's really positioned itself as an all-around AI assistant. So it mainly has 5 key application use cases. So real-time meeting transcription summaries, processing lengthy content, providing summaries that require complicated comprehension, AI PowerPoint presentation creation, real-time simultaneous translation, video chat with AI agent that can provide problem solving. So the uniqueness of QN is because it's open source, like you mentioned, and it's really committed to that. And it's various versions, like I mentioned, for different like application uses are actually all available on platforms like Hugging Face and ModelScope. So a lot of developers that are using it are actually outside of China, which is quite interesting. And people are surprised to find that it's a Chinese made LLM. I think I was reading
It's
it says
cheaper
the
as well,
company.
right? It's cheaper
Yes,
than a
yeah.
lot of models, which is probably why people are surprised, but why there's such an uptake because as my understanding is, it's cheaper than kind of comparable
Per what token?
Western
Per
models by
million
tokens. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, but not by million tokens. Yeah, not by individual token. Well, I guess it is, but I'm not sure anyone's buying an individual token.
I've
Yeah.
been,
So in general, sorry, Jimmy, go on.
sorry, go. No, you go. You go.
No, just in general, it said that like for like the open source models, it's one of the cheapest and more easily adaptable ones. And then I think it's really leveraged its advantages, given that, like I mentioned earlier, where like it has a massive like database and data access to all their clients on their cloud infrastructure, and it continues to keep on tweaking its large language models. So Alibaba is really leading in this frontier in China right now.
Yeah, yeah. You've reminded me actually because so I was trying to download QN the other day onto my computer to run it locally. I
I've
think I
got
was
one. I've got one downloaded.
yeah. I was trying to. I
It's a
can
very
pop it on a
small,
USB
very
for you.
small model that I had.
Yeah, but I was trying to get the coder model because I know 2.5 QN 2.5 like coding 8 billion parameter models just come out, and I do a bit of that. So I was trying to download it the other day, but having a bit of difficulty. So I'll go and do that later. But yeah, like why? So on the like open source approach, Alibaba just doing open source, or are they doing like a similar model to Meta where they're basically like building everything and then just putting it out there? Is it a similar thing to that, or are they doing open source and closed source?
I think they're pretty committed to open source. My understanding is they what the CEO Eddie Wu was saying at Aspera, like their own cloud Alibaba Cloud conference, is that they are completely committed to supporting open source ecosystem from chip servers, networks, storage, and data centers. Like they want to push this ahead, like the AI development as much as possible in China or across the world.
And do you know if like do they have? Because I'm just curious about this, and I don't know if you know the answer, but like obviously when you release an LLM in China, there's different guardrails and different restrictions around what they can talk about, understandably. And then when you release them in the West, they're different again. So like, is there a QN China sort of open source model, and then a QN that goes on Hugging Face that's different? I'm not
I
actually sure.
actually don't know, but you know, like
I'm pretty sure by the
there.
one I downloaded, it's definitely different from what would be released to consumers in China because
Okay.
it was answering. I mean, I wasn't asking it, politically sensitive Chinese questions, but I'm pretty sure there were things where it was answering that it wouldn't be allowed to. So I guess the model itself, they will put out the version that he's on. Maybe that's why it's so rubbish on Tongi because they're answering questions and yeah, I don't know why my kid's teeth would be something politically sensitive, but maybe that's the reason why it can't answer that question very well.
I don't know if can be included in the podcast because it's a bit sensitive, but what I've heard is that, a lot of these Chinese models are actually using outside China data to train their models anyways. So, you know, they would be training it on the data that anyone can have in the West
Yeah.
versus like within China, it needs to comply to the Great Firewall rules, right?
Mm. Okay, that's fantastic. I think we'll kind of finish off, but we've got our kind of standard ending question. So my first one that we try and ask all of our guests is, without putting any pressure on you, medium to long term, where do you stand on the utopia versus dystopia debate with AI?
I think I'm a huge adopter of AI, and I really believe it's going to change our world like differently. So I think, like I said, like I think this is another internet, right? It's gonna change how we behave, how we consume, how we interact with people, how we do our work, how the economy even runs. I think I think it's going to be better, more productive, more efficient for, people like us who, especially like us who do use majority of our time, like our work is, from our brain, less than labor. Whereas obviously within our episode, we even touched on, there are a lot of negative effects, which is like in the environmental space, in energy consumption, in, um, you know, um, what's the word for it? I guess resource allocation. So
Mm.
will essentially the poor be more poor and the rich become more rich. So the rich will be able to access more technology. And will that even grow that disparity even more? So I think there is that huge risk. And then obviously beyond that is the human privacy, data security, AI safety issue risk. And, even in 2019, I did a video for CNBC with like, what is deepfakes? This is like, I think my first exposure to even AI back then. And that was so like juvenile. I was literally talking about how people are making fake Obama videos and fake videos for political reasons. And looking back now, the videos look so not real. I even made a video of someone else's face plugged onto my body. But that these are all issues that I hope policymakers, regulators, and innovators will continue to think, and then I think it definitely needs to be regulated. But in the long term, I really believe it will make us more efficient and more productive, and I think it actually helps with my creativity, helps with my work, and helps with a lot of things. And what it'll mean for the next generation will no longer be like, oh, can you write PowerPoints the fastest, it would be like, can you prompt the AI tools to help you make this the best, most efficient way, I think. So it's just another kind of tool set and mindset. Just like 30 years ago, people didn't need to learn how to write pretty anymore. They just had to know how to type well and type fast. Although there's argument that, we can still write well for aesthetic reasons, it's obviously made everything a lot more productive and a lot faster.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on almost all of that. I feel like the danger is, and I've felt myself sort of slip this way a little bit sometimes, is like if you use these tools, but you're not like actually doing any of the input yourself. So like the difference between prompting an AI to write you an email or do something like, come up with a business plan, something like that. If you don't put any effort into it at all on your part, then it's sort of, you can become lazy and just kind of like hand it over to the AI. I'd say in general, that's not how I use them. And it's actually more of a creative, I don't know, it's like almost the process of kind of having a back and forth with somebody about an idea, like bouncing an idea around, which I think is the best use for me. But I do think my feeling is that a lot of people, when it becomes really common to use AI, I think there will be a lot of laziness.
Oh, definitely. And I think I even caught myself, like exactly like you said, if you write with it, I frankly think the current tools don't write well enough and I still have to re-edit it. So if you don't, it just sounds like a robot. It doesn't sound natural, and it's very formulaic. So like it gets repetitive, and it's not creative. So I think there's always an argument, and then obviously the argument with copyright issues as well. So I'm not someone who can give an answer to how to solve this issue, but I personally think embracing it is the way for the future. And really right now, for people who are still kind of in denial of the value or just the importance of what it will mean, even if you're against it, just like 40 years ago, if you deny the importance of the internet, like you can't move forward with society then. So it's better to at least learn it and protect yourself and learn how to use these tools to be productive and to not harm others than to be passive in this kind of evolution.
So I wanted to just very final question for you. So it's not so much a question, but an opportunity, I guess. Maybe you could recommend one or two AI applications or anything else you want to recommend, maybe a film you want someone to watch or a book that you want them to read. And also maybe, your Substack. And I think maybe you could just introduce a bit, maybe the consultancy work you do as well, if you've got a few minutes to just finish off with that for us.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I do want to say thank you so much, guys. It's been a pleasure and a great chat. And it's, we did touch about a lot of topics and scratching the surface of many. But, for listeners, you can go to my Substack, AI Pro M on Substack. I do link to some of my articles that are published on like Fortune, Diplomat, other publications as well, there as well. And then in terms of recommendations, I'm still reading Li Feifei's book right now. I just started reading AI Snake Oil. I think it's a very, very easy read.
I've just bought that as well. I haven't started it yet.
Yeah.
I've just bought AI Snake Oil.
And then for any journalists out there, I just recently took a Pulitzer Center course. It was amazing on covering AI. It was taught by a good friend of mine called Karen Howe, who is a leading journalist who used to be at MIT Tech Review. And it really provided me with a good framework on how to examine AI and write stories about it. So it's a free program. They do select reporters from around the world or content writers from around the world, and provide you with these, like, I think, biannual online courses. So check that out. That was something that was super helpful for me this year. And then the last but not least is I do run a small consultancy as well. So combining my past life as a strategic comms communications professional, I do help select AI and tech companies right now with a lot of their strategic narrative or their corporate narrative or their international media relations. I don't do too much of the hands-on media like interactions, but I help advise them and I help a lot of the founders with how to position themselves or do media training as well. So if you're interested, feel free to reach out to me, or if you need this help, this kind of help in this area in strategic comms, feel free to reach out to me at grace@proemcommunications.com. So that's GRACE at PROEM communications.com. Maybe Matt and Jimmy, you guys can help me link it in the show notes too, if that's okay.
Definitely will. That's like an absolutely cracking interview. Like you say, it was really good fun. I think sometimes interviews are really interesting, sometimes they're really fun. I think this one was genuinely like both. So thank you so much. And maybe in a year's time when things have moved on, maybe we can do this again, because I think the subject is really interesting. And I think in a year's time, hopefully we will have seen some of those kind of advances, and we'll have an interesting story to tell that is more than just US versus China. Maybe it's, some more of kind of China's own advances and more interesting models and developments coming out of China.
We'll have had a year of Trump as well, so
we will have had a year of Trump. Yeah. Bring it on.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. I hope you've enjoyed that one. We'll leave as usual. Jimmy will be back at the decks with Suno this week, I think.
Oh yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So enjoy the show, enjoy the tune, and we will see you all next week.
Cheers. Bye.
Between you and me. One by force, one by choice, different paths. Same human voice, both believe they hold the key, both too blind